Chapter 1. My birth and early childhood. 1928 was quite a year. Piccadilly Underground Station was opened. The River Thames burst its banks. Mickey Mouse made his debut. London's new airport was opened at Croydon. Women participated in the Olympic Games for the first time. Felsted won the Derby at 33-1. Blackburn Rovers won the FA Cup final for the sixth time, beating Huddersfield Town 3-0. Al Jolson's record Sonny Boy sold 12 million copies in 4 weeks. J.L. Baird demonstrated his first colour television, and I was born. I entered this world on November 28th in the front bedroom of 1 Prothero Road, Fulham, in London. My maternal grandmother, Julia, who was assisting the midwife, Nurse Brown-John, was 52 years old on that day, and she was determined that her daughter's first child would share her birthday. To make this possible, she plied my poor mother with castor oil and goodness knows what else to induce the birth. And I just made it by the skin of my gums at 11:55 p.m. Later in my childhood, when we moved to 9 Anselm Road, the home of my grandparents, there was always a race to the front door when the post arrived on our birthday to collect the cards. She always had more than me, much to her delight and my annoyance. My mother, Florence, was 23 years old, and Albert, my father, was aged 25 when I was born. I was a much-wanted baby and the image of my father. When I was growing up, relatives would remark, "She's a proper Morgan," whereas my brother, who inherited my mother's looks, would be described as a proper Braham. Prothero Road is typical of many roads to be found in Fulham that were built during the last 30 years of the 19th century. Rows of terraced houses with slate roofs comprising 2 up and 2 down, plus a scullery, as kitchens were called in those days, and an outside lavatory. People living in these houses usually had a zinc bath hanging on the wall in the backyard. The bath would be brought in every Friday night and laboriously filled with hot water from saucepans and kettles which had been heated on the stove or kitchen range. The living room was called the kitchen and was the focal point of the house. It was used for cooking, eating and relaxing. The kitchen range provided warmth and cooking facilities. When I was young, most of the cooking was done in the scullery on the gas stove, though food cooked in the range oven always tasted better. The range had to be black-leaded every day. We used a product called Zebo. This was applied with a brush, rather like a scrubbing brush, with a handle at the top. Then it was burnished until you could see your face in it. The hearth had to be whitened every day with a hearthstone. This was a block of some whitening agent that was rubbed over the dampened hearth. And when it dried, the hearth was snowy white. The range contained a section for the fire. Next to that was the oven. The top, or hob, was used for boiling water and cooking. It was comforting to always have a kettle of water boiling on the hob, ready to make a cup of tea, and a glowing fire to make toast, using the toasting fork that hung on a hook by the fire. The mantelpiece was the shelf above the range, on which was pinned a length of decorative material, usually velvet or chenille, with tassels along the lower edge. On the shelf was a collection of ornaments, photographs and a clock. A mirror or picture hung on the wall above the shelf. The room was furnished with a table and dining chairs, 1 or 2 fireside chairs, a dresser or sideboard, and a wireless set and a gramophone. The floor was covered in oilcloth, the old name for linoleum, with a rug in front of the fire. There was a brass fender surrounding the hearth, complete with brass fire irons which reflected the light from the fire and looked very pretty against the blackness of the range and the whiteness of the hearth. It was my brother's Saturday morning job to clean the brass with bluebell metal polish. My mother always used to say that elbow grease was the best thing to use, meaning the harder you applied the polish, the better the shine. When she praised the result of his labours, he would proudly say that he had used plenty of elbow grease. The kitchen I have described was the one in Anselm Road, as I was too young to remember the kitchens in Prothero Road and Sandylands Road, but they would have been the same there. The front room of the house was always the best room, used only for special occasions or when visitors arrived. In this room were the most comfortable chairs, the best carpet and curtains, and the prettiest ornaments. I remember when I visited my grandmother at Anselm Road, I used to plead with her to take me into her front room so that I could just gaze at the treasures she had in there. She would ceremoniously unlock the door and take me by the hand on a guided tour of the room. My favourite ornament was a statuette of Queen Alexandra, surrounded by Alexandra roses under a glass dome. I always asked the same questions about it, such as who she was and why the roses were there. She always gave the same answer, that when Queen Alexandra rode through the streets in her carriage, the people lining the streets threw dog roses in the path of the carriage. From then on, the roses were called Alexandra roses. I don't know how true the story is, but I like to hear it over and over again. Alexandra stood on top of the piano. Nearly every home had a piano in those days. Then there was the china cabinet full of fascinating knickknacks, including lots of crested china, which were small replicas of everyday items such as kettles and cheese dishes. These were very popular when I was young, that there was so much to wonder at and admire in that room. It is my bedroom now and looks very different, but I often look around when I am lying in bed and picture how it used to be. We lived in Prothero Road until the autumn of 1931. My brother Eddie was born there on May 24th of that year. He was named after my father, whose full name was Albert Edward, but has always been known as Eddie because he dislikes the name Albert. My paternal grandfather was also named Albert Edward. He was named after the Prince Consort, as were so many boys who were born during Queen Victoria's reign. Just before his birth, our house became infested with rats from a broken sewer beneath the foundations. At night, when a scuffling noise was heard downstairs, my father would creep downstairs, armed with his bus conductor's ticket rack to attack and hopefully kill the intruders. When he described all this to me in later years, the size of the rats increased as time went on. He would demonstrate with his hands the size of the rats, rather like a fisherman boasting of the size of his catch. It seems that there was a glut of rats in Fulham in 1931. In August, poison had been laid in 160 sewers. 216 premises were visited and 335 rats were destroyed in various ways. From Prothero Road we moved to another part of Fulham, number 7 Sandilands Road, which is just off the Wandsworth Bridge Road. Eddie was about 6 months old and I was nearly 3. It was here that I had a very nasty fall downstairs whilst carrying Eddie's feeding bottle. I can remember falling, and the memory has left me with apprehension when walking downstairs to this day. In later life, I developed problems with my spine, which doctors attributed to this fall. I attended Langford Road School soon after my 3rd birthday. But the only recollection I have of my time there was when I caught my finger in the pram hood just prior to having a school photograph taken. The Eelbrook Common was quite close, and I can remember being taken there in my pushchair. One day, a model aeroplane crashed into the wheel of my pushchair, missing me by inches. It frightened me so much that for years afterwards the sight of aeroplanes filled me with horror, especially grounded ones. At Canvey Island, where we spent our holidays, there was an aeroplane that took people for joy rides to Southend and back. It looked enormous to me, though it was probably quite small. When we approached its vast silver body as we walked along the sea wall, I always had to look the other way. Fortunately, the fear had left me by the time I had the opportunity to travel by air. Just opposite our house in Sandilands Road, there was a grocer's shop owned by Mrs. Tuckwell. She was a close friend of my grandmother Julia, to whom I shall refer from now as Nan. In fact, Nan had lent Mrs. Tuckwell the £100 necessary to start her business years earlier. It was one of those shops that had started life as a terraced house, but it had been converted into a shop by enlarging the front window and putting counters into the front room. A bell rang as you entered the shop, and Mrs. Tuckwell would emerge from her living room at the back. She was a plump, jolly lady with frizzy hair parted in the middle, which caused it to stick out each side. I was fascinated by her hair because it always looked so wild and untidy. Bill, her husband, used to play the piano at parties, but the only song I ever remember him playing and singing Trumpeter, what are you sounding now? He was usually a very jolly man, but he always became very solemn whenever he sang this rather mournful song. Anyway, back to the shop. As you entered the rather dark interior, there was a counter immediately facing you and one on your right, forming an L shape. The part facing contained jars of sweets. You could buy acid drops, pear drops, hundreds and thousands, everlasting toffee, coconut ice, aniseed balls, mint humbugs and many other delights. You could get quite a big bag full for a halfpenny in those days. The counter to the right was for groceries, and she stocked everything under the sun. When we moved away from Sandylands Road, I was sent to Mrs. Tuckwell's every Saturday to buy the groceries for Nan, where I got off the number 28 bus in Wandsworth Bridge Road. There used to be a newsagent's shop with Shirley Temple books in the window. Being an avid fan of hers, I would gaze at the front covers for ages, but I could never buy one as they cost sixpence each, which was a fortune in those days. I was given one as a present once, and it was a treasured possession for years. I would look at the pictures of Shirley with her dolls, riding her bike, posing outside her lovely house, and always dressed in those adorable little dresses. I would envy her like mad. Nan always made my dresses, and I would plead with her to make me a Shirley Temple dress, for which you could buy paper patterns, but I never managed to persuade her to make one for me. I particularly admired Shirley Temple's curly hair. Mine was as straight as a yard of pump water, and I'm ashamed to say that I used to tell the little girls in my class that although my hair was straight on top, underneath it was all curls, just like Shirley Temple's. I don't think I fooled anyone, least of all myself. Little did I think in those days that one day I would visit Hollywood and see Burbank Studios, where my heroine made all her films. But all that was a long way off. When I managed to drag myself away from the newsagent's window, I would walk to Mrs. Tuckwell's to get the shopping. She always insisted on locking up her shop to see me across the road to the bus stop, and then waiting with me for the bus to come. I used to protest that I was quite big enough to see myself home. Her concern for my safety must have cost her a lot of customers.